Welcome to the 64 Squares studio, where chess history comes to life, one classical battle at a time. Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day so far, and welcome to the one of the most iconic encounter between the two giants of 19th century. The current world champion William Steinitz and his counterpart, the challenger Mikhail Chigorin. And it's a world championship game we are covering, which happened in Havana, and this is game number 4. So we already see the first game won by Mikhail Chigorin in the great fashion, and the other two games ended in a draw, and it's Steinitz time to get some revenge. And Steinitz starts with e4. Okay, e5 by Mikhail Chigorin, and knight f3, knight c6, and no Italian this time. We have the Ruello pace with bishop to b5, and we have the Berlin defense with knight to f6. It would be interesting to see what will happen if white just castles and what Mikhail Chigorin had in mind that time. But William Steinitz is known for his innovation in this particular d3 line in Ruello pace and also in Italian games. Okay, d6. So kind of a Steinitz variation against Steinitz himself. c3. So all the standard moves so far. Pawn to g6. Knight b to d2, so not castling, just waiting for black to castle first. Knight bishop to g7, so all standard moves, getting the bishop in the nice diagonal, ready to castle. And okay, here most of us would have played either h3 or castles, but not Steinitz. Actually, if you look carefully, there is no way black can open the center right now when the black is so underdeveloped. So Steinitz actually use this one tempo to play knight to f1 and not castle, but keep the f1 square open for this knight to maneuver. You will see what this knight is doing on f1. Castles. Okay, and here very interesting move by Steinitz. Bishop to a4. Previously, Steinitz actually commented after this game, after this game, that queen e2, then bishop d7 is very strong, because now there is some threats of knight d4. As we can see, there are some discoveries on this bishop, and if you now play bishop to a4, then knight d4 is a very strong move. Idea being, after c into d4, bishop into a4, and if you try to win the pawn, which you cannot because bishop b5 is a super strong move, and black is actually just better. Rook e8 is coming in when the knight will be attacked, and if the knight moves, then the d3 pawn hangs, and keep in mind your king is in the center and you are 2 moves away from castling. So that is bad. So that does not work according to Steinitz. That's why he played bishop to a4, anticipating bishop to d7, which Mikhail Chigorin did not play. If he had played bishop to d7, then bishop to c2 or bishop to b3 would have been save the bishop for future. Maybe now knight g3, maybe h4, h5, stuff like that. Okay, but in our game after bishop to a4, knight to d7 is played. Now after this game, long after this game, Keres actually came up with this idea. If black plays a6 with the idea of, let's say, b5, and kind of getting the position of the Steinitz defense after the black plays a6, then white should continue with knight e3. Knight e3 is the idea Steinitz gave, but after a6, knight to g3 is idea given by Paul Keres. And after b5, bishop to b3, d5, and queen e2. Now rook e8 and let's say castles, bishop b7. According to Paul Keres, it is, kind of equal, but definitely black is out of woods. Black has the center, black has 2 Fanketo bishop, black has nice knights. So there should be nothing black to worry about. So this is what black should play, a6 followed by b5. But in our game, Mikhail Chigorin played knight to d7. Idea is quite clear. He wants to play pawn to f5 and attack the king, which is still in the center of the board. So it does make sense. But first Steinitz played knight to e3. Now this knight looks really good on e3. It defends the f5 square. Attacks the d5 square. Kind of defends f5, but not really. But it's still quite a nice knight. And knight to c5 by Mikhail Chigorin. attacking the bishop. But here after this game, Richard Ritty suggested pawn to f5 directly and said that white could try pawn to b4 with the idea of if you black plays f4, then knight to d5, and after g5, position is roughly balanced, but it's quite unclear who is better. And here actually instead of b4, another grandmaster actually suggested e takes f5, g takes f5, and knight d5 directly, and the valuation of this position is considered slightly better for white that time. However, probably it's a kind of equal, more like an equal than slightly better. Okay, but after knight to e3, knight to c5 by Mikhail Chigorin, and we have bishop to c2. Of course, you don't want to give up this bishop. You have spent too many tempos on this bishop. You want to keep this bishop. And there are some ideas pawn to d4. So, I mean pawn d4, knight e6 and pawn d5. So, Chigorin played knight to e6 directly. And, well, this knight kind of stops this bishop from developing, and you are still not playing f5. So, here white has the opportunity. So, pause the video here and try to find how would you continue this position as white. Try to find a very nice idea for white while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so the move is pawn to h4. See, the black king has castled already. We already know where this king is, and there is a pawn on g6, which is hook in the position. So pawn to h4 definitely makes sense with the idea of pawn to h5 and already start attacking the king. While white king is right now very safe in the center, may play bishop d2, queen e2 and long castle also if you feel like it. But yeah, h4, very strong move by Steinitz. It goes on to show how powerful Steinitz was at that time. Okay, knight to e7 by black. Now, this is quite slow. Here, after this game, a lot of people actually debated on the move f5, which I think is the most critical of the lines here. ef5. Here actually after the game, Mikhail Chigorin said that he was calculating h5, f4, knight d5, g5, h6, a good move, bishop f6, and bishop to b3 when he had to play king h8, and he considered this position as better for white. And yes, true, Injan agrees, and Injan says this is actually completely winning for white. Something like knight h2 followed by knight g4, and white is already quite winning here because, I mean, look at this bishop. And you can also just get your queen into the game somewhere, let's say queen h5 also, and long castle. Slowly but surely you will start playing g3, capture on f4, and then you will open up the position to black king. So yeah, that is what Mikhail Chigorin was worried about when he saw the pawn to f5 variation. And that's why he played knight to e7. Maybe his idea is to play f5, and after pawn takes he wants to capture back with the knight, so to exchange of more pieces, I guess. But it is of course very slow, and h5 of course by white. And now d5. Okay, that is the other idea of knight to e7, to get the pawn to d5 in. Another idea which later on surfaced was pawn to g5, but it does not work because of pawn to h6. Good move. Of course, Steinitz would have played that. Okay, pawn to d5 by Mikhail Chigorin. So it is very principled that whenever your opponent is attacking on the flank, you are supposed to, I mean, it's a thumb rule, you are always going to open the center. And especially when your opponent's king is in the center. So it makes a lot of sense. Here, Steinitz, before capturing anything on center, took on g6. So idea being any pawn takes here comes with a check. So you have to capture back. And a mistake, a first actual mistake of the game played by Mikhail Chigorin, f takes g6. Which definitely makes sense. You are opening up the f file. And you are closing, keep this h file closed. But it is not the good move. H into g6 is the best move, and Mikhail Chigorin gave this variation, e takes d5, which is of course not forced. Here later on Ritty said queen e2 followed by bishop d2 and long castle, and white is actually better, which Injan agrees. But okay, let's see what Mikhail Chigorin says after the game. E takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and if you play something like bishop to h6, then it does not work, because after bishop h6, rook h6, king g7, and let's say queen d4, there is, well, queen d2 is a blunder, but it's still queen d2, the knight f4 is very strong, and black is completely winning in this position. The rook is hanging, the pawn is hanging, and I mean, pawn to e4 may come, bishop to f5 may come, and this is a catastrophic position for this king on e1. But okay, of course, this is all not forced. It is the one variation which Mikhail Chigorin gave after the game, in the support of h into g6, which he agrees that f into g6 is a mistake, which is important. Okay, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and bishop to b3, gaining a beautiful bishop for the beautiful diagonal for this bishop, and that is gonna be very hard to deal with this bishop. So queen to c6 by Chigorin, keeping a defense of this knight. Actually, this is a very annoying pain in the position. Something like knight g5 may come in, and actually right now knight g5 is possible, but you don't want to give up the g2 pawn quite yet. So queen to e2, just well, maybe not attacking this pawn, but just preparing bishop e3 and long castles. And once you have the king out of the center, then you can attack on the king set freely, right? And bishop to d7, and definitely this is quite slow. A better move would have been pawn to a5, which is given by Chigorin himself, when if white plays pawn to a4, then queen to b6 is a strong move. Idea being, well, you have to play bishop to c2 or bishop to a2, but if you capture on e6, which is a blunder, bishop takes e6 and knight g5, this is blunder because bishop f5, knight h7, yes, you won the pawn, but after rook f2 d8, black is winning the game. The d3 pawn is attacked and black's bishops are just in the game, and you have no way to continue. That knight on h7 is quite silly. This is again not forced, but Chigorin gave this variation. Okay, so after queen to e2, bishop to d7, pawn to a5 of course would be better. Here white simply continued with bishop to e3, threatening long castle of course, and then you will play knight to g5 and stuff like that, and king to h8. So the knight on e6 is not pinned, so you cannot play knight to g5 just yet. A better would have been to play rook to f7 to break this pin. Now, idea is if you play long castle, then black plays bishop to h8. But this is the idea which Steinitz gave, where the idea is actually the rook defends the h7 pawn. That's why bishop to h8. But there is a problem with this variation, because now white plays d4, which was later found, and it is quite winning for white now. So after king h8 in the game, and castle, long castle by Steinitz of course, and rook a to e8. There is no real counterplay on the queen side, so the Mikhail Chigorin put all his forces in the center, try to open up the center and get the counterplay there. But okay, it is white to move again. You want to play d4 of course, but the thing is that rook stays down the queen, so you cannot really play d4 right now, because pawn takes and you cannot recapture with the bishop, because then the queen will be attacked. So what will you play to get your queen out of the attack on the e file here? While I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, the move is actually very beautiful, queen to f1. I mean, how many of us would think of queen to f1? That's putting the queen on the back rank, but that's the most active square that queen has right now. If you play queen to c2, then you don't really want the queen to stare down this queen, and also you'd never want this bishop to come here with an attack. It is playable, but you rather want this bishop to have the c2 on the future. You could, but queen to f1 is such a nice move. And it still has the influence. The idea being rook h4, queen h1, and attack on the h7 pawn. So you don't want the queen to get too far away from the king side attack. Okay, a5 by black. Now black is trying to gain some counterplay on the queen side, but it's too slow. Here, Chigorin and Steinitz both suggested that rook to f5 is one move, which is a good move, threatening knight to f8, and that knight would defend the h7 pawn. And it's a nice defense. Another move, Steinitz and Chigorin considered what knight to f4, but it does not work because of rook takes h7, king takes h7, knight g5, king s6, knight f7, and with this king hunt, it's, well, now it king f6, and while black is winning. So pawn to a5 here by black, pawn to d4 by white. A very strong move. Of course, you want to open up this diagonal to the king because that's the only diagonal which is keeping the black king safe. E takes d4. I mean, what else? Knight takes d4. And here's the problem. If you play knight into d4, then do you see what white has prepared here? Yeah. Rook takes h7 check. As soon as this bishop opens up, the king has no square to move, and after takes and queen h1, it's gonna be checkmate after bishop s6, queen s6. So that is something you cannot play. So instead of knight into d4, bishop into d4 played. So giving the g7 square for the king in terms of rook into h7 sacrifices. But here Steinitz found a brilliant move. Pause the video, try to find what will you play here while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay. Steinitz found not bishop into d4, because if you play bishop into d4, then knight into d4, and okay, after rook into d4, something like rook e7, and the things are defended for now. The move here is rook takes d4. Preserving the dark square bishop, that is your key. You don't care about the rook who is not participating in the game. You care about your dark square bishop, who will be monster when it lands on this diagonal. Okay, of course, black took red knight takes d4, but if you play rook to e7, which is your best defense, then rook to h4, rook h to f7, and okay, here a lot of moves are possible. Something like a4 is a very strong move here, white. But Chigorin said that he was afraid of pawn to g3 with the idea of bishop d4, something like king g8, and some queen d3, queen g3, queen g6 ideas, which is a bit artificial, I have to admit, but that is what Chigorin said. There are many other moves, of course, that is winning. So Chigorin played knight into d4, and for the last moment, pause the video and try to find a brilliant continuation from here onward while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so the move in question is not bishop into d4, because if bishop into d4 check, then rook f6. Okay, I mean, you could play something like queen b5, and that if you find this move, then congratulations, you can play this position. But a beautiful move in this position is what Steinitz played, and that is rook takes h7 check. Congratulations to everyone who found this move. Of course, the idea is after king takes, queen h1 check, king g7, and now you play bishop to h6 check. Not bishop into d4 again, because rook f6 again, but bishop to h6. I mean, you could play queen s6 also, it's the same idea. Bishop to h6 check, king to f6, the only move. If you play king on the h file, then bishop into f8 will come with a discover check, and that would be checkmate soon. So king to f6, and here comes queen to h4 check. Now if you play g5, then queen into g5 is mate. So king to e5, and simple queen into d4 check. And this, it was in this position at move number 28 that challenger Mikhail Chigorin resigned the game, and William Steinitz scored his first victory on game number 4 in this World Championship match, and leveled the score actually, which is very important, because Mikhail Chigorin was leading by 1 point. Well, you resigned because after king to f5, which is your only move, they respond to g4, checkmate, or queen to f4, does not matter. I like pawn to g4 more. So yeah, that was the game. Really nice attack by William Steinitz. A very modern type of attack with this h4, h5 idea. I hope you like this game. I hope you like this video. And yeah, I will see you on the next one. Bye.